Hey, it's Menz here. I am doing a kind of little mini preview of the new wheeled French light tanks that are coming in 1.4 for World of Tanks. This video I'm just going a little bit of an overview of these tanks and more or less what you can kind of expect from them in the tech tree, the garage, and as far as like general gameplay goes. Starting out, you'll see the French tech tree here. You kind of have a little mini branch now that branches off of the AMX, whereas previously you had to go down and get to the batch at 12T and then kind of make your decision. Now you can branch off, and the wheeled light tanks start at tier 6 and go all the way up to tier 10. The rapid and cruise mode that you see on a lot of like previews, and if you've watched say the Panhard EBR 75, which is the tier 8 premium tank that you can't see it in the tech tree here, but that's going to be the premium to go alongside this new kind of branch. You won't be able to swap between those modes for the tier 6 and tier 7. That begins at tier 8 with the Lynx 6x6. So starting out here, once we kind of click over here, you have the Panhard AMD 178B. Now this tank, you start out with just 4 wheels. The way that wheel vehicles work, if you lose half of your total amount of wheels, basically then you're immobilized. Otherwise, you can still keep moving, say if one wheel gets knocked out on this. However, you do lose some speed and also maneuverability. It basically acts as like a debuff to where it greatly increases your terrain resistance that you can't see in the list, but you know most people know what terrain resistance is. Now the AMD 178B, when it comes to like the initial grind and stuff, coming from the AMX ELC BIS, as you see here, we have the 275 millimeters and a 90 millimeter. Coming into this tank over here, you'll see that they don't really line up to where you'll see the 75 millimeter, which it doesn't really transfer over from the BIS. So stock grind, this is kind of the most jarring thing, and this is going to what people are going to see for their first wheeled tank. You're going to start out with a pretty poor stock grind, only a 47 millimeter, and then you have to kind of unlock stuff and move up. It's it's kind of jarring. That's I guess what the say dud of the line is, but this tank's still very mobile. You'll see French lights with the wheels, very mobile, very poor view range here. Also low, or not low concealment, but very good concealment, so people aren't going to be able to spot you very well. Great mobility, moving forward and backwards, 65 kilometers an hour. There's a new stat called maximum wheel turning angle, so basically hull traverse, that's something to where if you click over on the 12T here, so traverse and also wheel here, they don't really coincide with one another. You kind of have to feel it out. There's no like direct comparison, which I'm kind of glad they separated it, because that was confusing when I was trying to do like the premium Panhard comparison. But overall, the guns, they're all right accuracy wise. Also gun depression, more or less things are pretty decent on the gun here. One thing you'll notice, the HE rounds are pretty nice with penetration. 75 millimeters of pen on an HE round for a 75 millimeter gun is pretty darn good. And it's a solid tank, but this is definitely gonna be a painful stock grind until you get this thing elite. After that, it's basically your typical light, just you trade a little bit of view range, or quite a bit of view range I should say, for a solid gun, good HE round, and good camouflage. Next up in the line, you have the Hotchkiss EBR, which this tank you see adds a couple wheels on there, looks a little bit say cooler, but it still doesn't have the two different modes. So you won't have the rapid and cruise mode. As you see, it doesn't really pop up in the side here, whereas for the next tank you'll see that. Again, with the stock grind here, you start out with the top gun from the previous tank. However, you do need to more or less unlock 2 other guns, so you are going to be pretty hurting when it comes to damaging things higher tier than you. That seems to be kind of the trend of the grinds on this line. You start out with kind of okay guns, but they don't really do too much. And since your view range is pretty low, it's going to be kind of hard since you're not exactly scouting as well as you might like. The view range on this is 368, and this is with optics. Also, I have a fully kind of maxed out crew here, where if you pop over to the 1375, that doesn't really have even brothers in arms, but does have optics, you have 416 meters compared to the 368 on this. So you're hurting on view range. However, concealment, again, is pretty darn good for your tier. The speed, unlike the previous tank, you gain a little bit going forward. However, your reverse speed is only 45, which is still really good for a tank. But for wheeled tanks, you'll notice some go forward and backwards the same. Some go forward pretty well, but reverse, a little slower. Then once you get into the rapid mode, there's also different stats there. So each one of them plays a little differently. Also, the maximum turning angle is less on this than the previous tank of 24, so it doesn't turn as well, but it is much faster. The gun, like talking about the previous tier 6 gun, once you get it fully elite, more or less, it's pretty accurate. You have a pretty good HE shell. As you can see, 75 millimeters a pen, so that doesn't increase, but your damage greatly increases. And it's pretty accurate, good aiming time, good on the move accuracy. Nothing really to ding it on outside of the DPM across pretty much all the tanks is pretty much at the bottom of light tanks. It's on par, but just a little bit less than most lights in their tiers. Moving on to the next tank, which you'll see here adds in the rapid and cruise mode. You have the Lynx 6x6. Still the same amount of wheels as the previous one, so if you lose 3 of them, you won't be able to move. Pretty much you can get knocked out 2 of them and you'll still move, albeit extremely slow, so you're probably going to die. This tank, I think it looks pretty pretty odd, compared to other tanks in the game, but of course with wheeled light tanks coming in, obviously there's going to be slightly different models now. But playing this tank, it's actually pretty fun. Whereas the tier 6 I liked, I played a little bit in it. You had more or less, the bad stock grind, albeit I'm on a test server, I didn't stock grind it. The tier 6 was pretty fun with the top gun. I'll give it that, albeit, it's not like the easiest to kind of get around and turn, especially if you're like in confined spaces and without the different modes. 65 kilometers an hour is great, but you still take some damage if you're not careful. This tank, with the 2 different modes, it's pretty fun. The gun also hurts. Getting into like the tree here, more or less coming from the EBR Hotchkiss, you can see that none of the guns basically carry over. If you max this out, so 75, 100 meters a second, none of them carry over at all. So you're right on a basically pretty bad stock grind when it comes to the gun department yet again. So that's 3 in a row now. So they're not going to be the easiest grinds unless you kind of free XP and get up to at least like this 90 millimeter, if not the top 90 millimeter here. Just kind of wanted to point that out because a lot of people are excited for these tanks. So am I. Stock grinds are a little difficult though. This gun though, being 90 millimeter instead of 75, more damage per shot. Penetration is excellent, for a tier 8. Like, it's not gonna be mind-blowing, but it's excellent when you kind of factor in your other attributes as far as speed and flexibility. Comparing it to the Batchat 12T here, you can see your pen's a little bit better than that. So this is the Lynx here, 6x6. That's the Batchat 12T. So more or less accuracy, it takes a little ding, but aiming time's better. You have more damage per shot, better penetration, especially with this HE round, 320 damage, 90 millimeters a pen. That's pretty darn good. Basically, the main ding against this tank mainly comes down to your DPM isn't the greatest at tier 8 for a light tank, albeit compared to the Batchat 12T, it's not that bad. Granted, that has an autoloader. As you can kind of see, swapping around here, the Batchat 12T only has 1600. Meanwhile, getting back to the Lynx, 1986, and that's with all these crew skills and all the equipment. I'll do kind of deeper analysis into each tank in a different video here. But I had fun playing this. The gun hurts, albeit, the slightly large size of this leads you to get hit up a bit. And also kind of looking at this, noting the speeds for each one of these, 58 kilometers forward and backwards, and also in the rapid mode 82 forward and backwards. This thing's really fast, and also with really good concealment, but yet again, pretty poor V range. Everything more or less maxed out without just having food. 368 here. Compare it to the 12T that doesn't even have brothers in arms. 427. So, be prepared. Moving up to the tier 9 EBR. This is something where, with the researching again, you can see you start out with the 90mm CN and then upgrade to this one, to 921. Once again, you can see 921 F1 here on the Lynx, and then CN90 F3. However, popping over to this, it's a different tank gun again. They just have slightly different names. See, that's the F1, tier 9, where once again, until you kind of get this top gun, you're hurting a little bit, but this stock grind at tier 9 isn't that bad, whereas the previous 6, 7, 8, you kind of need those upgraded guns before that tank really starts to shine. At tier 9 here, you'll start noticing slightly more mobility on this, so 70 kilometers and a 90 kind of capped out. A little bit better turning angle on your wheels, and more or less your size starts to shrink, where this is similar to the premium EBR 75 that we've seen a lot of, where this one's more or less an upgun 90mm version, which the 90mm has pretty good stats to it. Decent pen, albeit starting at the 9 here and then especially the 10, your penetration is low, but that kind of coincides with your really great flexibility, so you can flank things easier. And also the premium, or not premium, excuse me, the HE shell, 90mm pen on a HE shell is pretty good. Accuracy's decent, and aiming time on the move accuracy is excellent. Camouflage gets bumped up to 42, kind of fully decked out without food. And your V range actually starts to get pretty, not to say decent, but it's all right. With crew scales, kind of optics, you can even put vents on it and take a V stabilizer off if you'd like, but I wouldn't recommend that. Or put food on it. 392 here. Whereas popping over to the 1390, albeit, this crew isn't as good, but it has some stats on it, 444. So you're starting to get a little bit up there with the V range, but you're still just below, maxing out, at 440 as far as your V range, what you see on the mini map, that little circle. I think that's it. Hopefully I'm not wrong. I'm sure someone will correct me if I am. But basically the tier 9 fully maxed out's pretty good. The stock grind isn't as bad as the previous ones, and then capping off, you have more or less the same tank, just looking a little bit different with the style of the hull and the turret, but it has a 105mm gun here, which this gun is pretty awesome, where just a little bit more penetration compared to the tier 9 here. As you can see, it just bumps up just a little bit, tier 10, tier 9. However, this HE round is pretty darn awesome. 500 damage, 105mm a pen. Your accuracy, once again, it's pretty darn good for a light tank, especially the aiming time on the move accuracy. Your V range isn't that bad at 392. Camouflage, really good. And more or less, the one thing to note of this tank compared to the other ones, which, sorry, I'm on the wrong tank here, I screwed up. More or less the V range, camouflage, blah, blah, blah. They're not too different. What I was getting to with the tier 10 here, excuse me for that. You go 75 kilometers an hour forward, only 50 in reverse in, your normal mode. Once you switch to rapid mode, it's 105 forward. That's insane. It does take a little bit of time to get up to speed, but you do hit that 75 easily. Anything above that, it takes a little bit of time to kind of get up to. But in the rapid mode, you'll go 75 in reverse instead of that 50. So that's really worth noting. Also, your turning angle on your wheel compared to the tier 9 is identical. So it's really hard to actually control this tank at your top speeds. To be honest, sometimes you're just zooming along and you just run into something because it pops right up in front of you, more or less. But digging a little bit deeper into the tier 10 here, since that kind of caps off things, you have more or less, this is just with 100% cruise. I configured them here. No cruise skills, more or less the same equipment, what most people would use. If you don't have access to, say, like a gun rammer, maybe put vents on it, more or less. But virtually, these are all the same as far as configured. You'll note the DPM, like I've talked about the other ones, you have a little bit lower DPM than most, very close to the AMX 13105. Accuracy is almost the best at tier 10, albeit the Panzerwagen beats it out just a smidgen, but the aiming time's awesome. Gun depression's workable. It's not great, it's not bad. Penetration is where you really lack, where you can easily see all these other ones outclass you. Basically standard, premium, but your HE is better than more or less all of them, albeit the Panzerwagen here has a pretty decent HE round to where that beats you out just by a smidgen as far as penetration. But let me look at the damage here. I forget the actual damage. So your damage is a lot better, but it beats you out a little bit penetration wise. Hit points, you're the lowest out of all lights because you're a wheeled vehicle, albeit you kind of make up a little bit for it with just your raw speed. Even without being in a rapid mode, you're basically tied with the Panzerwagen for the fastest tank forward. Reverse, you just blow them all out of the water. Once you swap over to rapid, you're the fastest tank basically in the game. Traverse speed, like I said, doesn't really line up between. I would say the EBR is on par with, like, relatively like the T100 light tank. It's not like the AMX 13105, which doesn't turn as well as the tier 10 ones or other tier 10 lights. This one, it turns really well. It kind of has to with how fast it goes, albeit when you're going like 90, 100 kilometers an hour, it's going to feel like it turns a little bit slow, just relatively because of that speed. Base concealment here, basically it's the best at tier 10, 24 for your base value, just with 100% crew. Only the T100 LT kind of comes close to that, so easily the best camouflage, albeit the view range here, as you can see, is absolutely terrible. Even the T100 LT doesn't really come close to it, and this is, with optics on all of these tanks, but it's just bad. But it's kind of okay with it, or I'm okay with it, to where it's a different role. I feel like the tier 10 is balanced pretty well. It's really hard to play, but it has a ton of upside, especially like mid and late game, especially with that HE shell. It gives you a lot of opportunities that other lights do not have. And I'm kind of surprised, like, looking at these, not that, they kind of been teasing, say an autoloader, but I was kind of holding out because the premium one has a 2-round autoloader, and literally you don't see that in any of the tech tree ones. But the standard one-shot guns on these, they work out. They're a little bit harder, but basically you just have to push and pull. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Just a quick little preview of these tanks. I'll be live streaming these on the test server, and more or less I'm sure you're going to see a plethora of videos of basically wheeled lights from this point on, because first one's being added to the game, and honestly they changed the game a little bit more than you'd think. Once you start having, say, 1, maybe 2 of these a battle, they're not just going to flat out, say, make the game unbalanced. However, they are a small nerf because they can counter a little bit better, and dive into somewhere and get out without dying already a little bit. Albeit, standard light tanks will still kind of beat these things up in prolonged fights because of that lower DPM. Unless you pen them with HE, they're going to be able to damage you better. Albeit, these things, you kind of have to keep moving, to where standard light tanks are still kind of like the main counters for these, outside of just like blasting them away with like a high caliber shot. These things are really deadly, hard to play, albeit, they're not going to ruin the balance because so many maps, it's really hard to get the most out of these in a lot of different areas. But hopefully you enjoyed this video and you're excited for these tanks. Otherwise, you'll probably see me and a ton of other basic content creators, streamers, what have you, crashing around in these things because it takes a little bit of getting used to. If you are playing on the test server, hold F1 in the beginning of the battle. It'll give you some tips. But thanks again for watching this. Have a good one.